Hi there, hello, my name's Lines, great to see you. Now today is the third in our in-depth series on body construction. With this lesson we're going to be focusing on the arms. Now the first two were the base frame and volumes, and then the neck and shoulders. And after this one, we're going to then cover things like the torso, the breasts, the crotch and butt, and the legs. The hands and the feet I've already covered in their own in-depth videos, which you can find on the channel. Now, if you're following along and you want to draw or take notes and you're finding it's a bit too quick with the sped up footage, what I'll do is I'm going to add pause points with written notes on screen if you need time. So, when you hear this noise and see this image, you can pause the video there and there'll be notes on screen for you to follow along. Now there's also going to be a homework sheet where you can use these principles with varying amounts of scaffolding and construct the figures and musculature yourself. And if you've done that and you want to post your homework, we have a Discord linked in the description where you can pop in and share your finished homework there. It's a great community and there's a lot of other things you can do there, share your artwork, meet other people, and we have server activities as well. Now, if you like what you see and you want to see it more often or more reliably, consider feeding the algo with a comment, a like, a subscribe. If you're in a position to do so, you can join the Patreon where I post the full PSD files from the videos, as well as exclusive one-to-one speed draw-alongs every fortnight or so. And if you do like to paint along, the speed paint at the end of this video will be available in the next week or so for you to paint along with in real time, and there's also a playlist with a bunch of others. So what are we going to cover in this video? So the first thing I'm going to do is, very quickly, I just want to cover off a bit of a refresh on how to draw hands. It won't be a full video on hands, but I just want to make sure we've got something to stick on the ends of the arms we're drawing. We'll then talk about things like the overall taper from thick to thin that you get along the limbs, and then how to construct those base volumes and how they're going to reflect different body types and different builds. We'll then talk about how the muscles fit together, both in orientation, like a chain, but also how they slip between each other, like a plait. And after that, I'll show you the simplified muscle structure that I use for even very big, thick and muscly characters, and also works for very slim characters as well, and we'll group them together into simplified forms. And once we have those forms, I'll show you how to distort them when the arms bend and how the muscles compress, and how to stretch them out and how to twist them, as well as how to construct the forearm muscles and how to orient them, using the two muscles in the forearm, the ulna and the radius, and how to remember them and what they do. And then lastly, a very quick primer on how to combine these muscles with the ones we've learned for things like the head and neck in the previous video. And I'll go through a bunch of real-world demonstrations of how to use these principles, these muscles, in a bunch of figures, and then we'll break down how you can do them as well. And finally, I'll have a speed paint where I've got a special image here of a girl with 6 arms to really show these principles in practice. And again, if you want to paint along in real time with this video at the end, I'll have a separate video up in the next week or so. We can do that in real time and I'll talk you through the whole process. So, let's begin. So, to begin, what I want to do is I'm going to show some basic principles of the hand. Again, this is not a hand video, but I just want to make sure that we're touching base on how to do some of these base principles, so we've got something to stick on the end of these arms we're going to draw. So first thing, we're going to draw a basic palm. This is essentially a sort of square shape, slightly wider at the top, and we draw a cross through the middle of that, and we'll have a point at the bottom of that palm shape, and that's going to be where all the fingers radiate from. Inside the palm, all the muscles and bones for the fingers, they radiate from the base all the way out. So that'll affect the direction that the fingers head. So when you think of how the fingers spread out, they spread out from that point at the base of the palm. Now, as far as lengths go, we start with the middle finger, which is as long as the palm itself. We break that into thirds, and then halfway down that top third section, that's the same length as the pointer and ring finger. And then, if we take the top section off of the ring finger, that'll be level with the height of the pinky. Instead of measuring these out with straight lines across, we're going to use radial lines, since all the bones radiate out from the base of the palm, and all of the lines will be parallel with radiating lines out as well. And then we'll place the thumb that comes up to about the first knuckle on the pointer finger. We'll put little gaps between the fingers here to make sure they're not just coming in together and touching. And then we'll place the fingers down, and we'll make sure the fingers have a little bit of taper to them, because fingers will get thinner as they move out from the center of the hand. This is going to be a common principle you'll see throughout a lot of what we're drawing today. Things like the arms and legs, as they move out from the core of the body, they get smaller, and same thing with the fingers. Now, once I've got those base shapes in, we're going to add the pads of the palm. So there's going to be 3 of them. There'll be a pad along the top, just under the fingers. There'll be one just behind the thumb, which is the muscle that closes the thumb into the palm. And then there'll be a pad on the outside edge underneath the pinky. Now, with the radial shaping of the fingers, you'll remember that if the fingers radiate out when they open, that means they converge in when they close. So when you're drawing a fist, make sure you're not drawing all of the fingers parallel, but instead you're having them converge in towards that point at the base of the palm. And remember as well that when you're drawing a hand from a side angle, not just a flat angle, you've got a lot of thickness for the pads of the palm, especially the one under the thumb, but don't forget about how thick the pad under the pinky can get. And then on the back of the hand, we have the knuckles. So this is where the bones will come to the surface towards the end palm. So you have 4 of them and 1 for the thumb as well. And depending what kind of hand and how bony and knobbly they are, you'll have more or less of that pronounced. Typically in male figures, you have more pronounced knuckles, but that's up to you. So now what I want to do is I'm just going to go over and quickly talk about a couple of the principles. And I want you to have all of these in your mind when we start drawing, because you need a few of these together while we're drawing. So the first thing I want to have front of mind is that the limbs, like the arms and legs, will taper from thick to thin as they move away from the body. And they'll also tend to curve outwards. And this is not just true for the limbs overall, but the individual sections themselves will tend to have an outward curve as well. Now, to construct those base volumes for the bones, if we look at the torso as being from the rib cage to the pelvis, the length of the arm is going to be the same length as the length from the top of the rib cage to the bottom of the pelvis. So the shoulder, the top of it will line up with the top of the rib cage, and the ball for the wrist joint is going to line up on the bottom edge with the bottom edge of the pelvis. And then the elbow sits in between those. Now, when we're constructing the base volumes on top of that then, we're going to start with those lengths of the bones, and then we'll split those lengths into thirds. So we'll split the upper arm into thirds and the lower arm into thirds. Now, depending on the build of your character, the upper arm can really vary. So we might have 3 of them here, where you can see in the first one, we've got the upper arm bulging out slightly, and then in the second one, we've got the upper arm bulging out slightly and coming in, but then bulging out a second time for the remaining 2 thirds. Or on the last one, we'll have a very slim arm, where the arm barely comes out for the first third, and then goes straight for the next 2 thirds. And then, for shaping the forearm, we'll also have it split into thirds, but it will be more universal, even between different builds. You'll have it widen for the first third, and then narrow for the next 2 thirds. As a construction shape, you can draw these out as like a simple coffin shape. And then, once we smooth those out, so we'll partially erase them, and then go over them, and we'll have it at its widest point, a third of the way down, and its narrowest point then towards the end before it gets to the wrist. And you can see each of those is going to follow the same principles, even with a very slim or a very muscular arm. And also remembering that the lower part of the arm, the forearm especially, will tend to have an outward bending bias. It's very subtle, but it will bend outwards a little bit. And you can see even with really slim arms, like the big arms, the musculature is there. We'll get into the musculature in a minute, but it's important to remember that there aren't going to be arms that don't have muscles and arms that do. Rather, all arms, regardless of build, have all of the same muscles. It's just a matter of how much and in what way you choose to express them. Now, speaking then of how we express the muscles. The muscles aren't just going to come out evenly like a widening or narrowing cylinder. Sometimes they'll come out more on one side than the other. So if we have then an arm from the front, side, and back, we're going to have the muscles of the pectoral in red, the deltoid in yellow, the bicep in green, the tricep in blue, and then we're going to have the muscles of the forearm in pink and purple. These are clusters of muscles. Now what we can do is we can think of them like the links in a chain. And so when we have links in a chain, you'll notice that the first link in the chain comes over. You can think of that as the deltoid, where it comes over the bicep and tricep. And then the bicep and tricep will come out, forward and back, and the muscles in the forearm, we're going to cluster them together with one cluster coming over and one cluster coming under. So it'll be on the outer side of the arm, lining up with the top of the palm, or the back of the hand. And then, in pink, we'll have the inner part of the arm, which will line up then with the palm. So then, with that, we've got the overall taper, the bones, the simple volumes, and where those muscles are sticking out. The next thing then to think of is where, not just where they stick out, but where they go in. So all of the muscles in the entire body have a point they start and end. They connect from one bone to another bone. That's what all of them do, because that's what they're all for. They all move something. So they're going to need to have a way of sitting between each other, and they work sort of like a plait of hair. And so they'll slip in between other muscles. So you'll have things like where the pectoral is going to slip in between the bicep and deltoid. The deltoid is going to slip in between the tricep and bicep. And so all of the muscle groups are going to have a point they slip in. This is called an insertion point. And this is especially important for very slim or lithe characters, because it's these insertion points and their orientation that give those subtle shapes to the arms and limbs. And so here, if we have this character here who's very slim, you can see that the shapes in the outline, even though we're not specifically showing all the individual muscle groups, those outlines work because we have all those insertion points and muscles laid out, even if they are very subtle. Now, with those concepts front of mind, what I want us to do is build out our finalized, simplified arm structure. So we're going to do 4 arms. We're going to do the upper arms as well. We're going to do 4 arms. We're going to do 1 from a side view, 1 from a front view, 1 from a back view, and 1 from the inside side view. So, to begin with, we're going to have our skeletal structure, which in this case is just the ball for the shoulder, the ball for the wrist, and then in between those two, both in location and in size, we're going to put the balls for the elbows. And then we're going to put the bones in, and we're going to split those bone lengths into thirds per section. Now, to begin with, on the upper arm, on the left there, this is the one that's going to be the outer side view. We're going to do the deltoid. Now the deltoid is going to come down over the top and come in to a point where it squeezes in between the next 2 muscles, which will draw in the next 2/3 of the upper arm. There's going to be the tricep at the back and the bicep at the front. Now keep in mind that the tricep, the one at the back, can tend to sit a little higher. It's got a muscle bladder that comes up from the elbow, and the elbow bone itself comes to the surface there. So the tricep's going to sit a little higher than the bicep. As we go forward then, we're going to do the shape of the forearm. And remembering that it gets wider for the first third, narrower for the next 2/3, it, like the entire arm, trends inward and gets narrower over the length of the limb, and that last 2/3 of the length of the forearm will tend to curve inwards. And now we'll start laying out the muscles. So first, we're going to draw coming out from between the bicep and the tricep, in that space for the elbow there, we're going to draw the brachio group, which is a couple of muscles together. Now they come out from between the bicep and tricep, but they also connect to the elbow, or close to it. So they kind of come out like a flag. If you imagine that the line between the bicep and the tricep is an upside down flag, then it's coming out from between those two and then wrapping around the forearm. And then we'll do the rest of them, which is the extensor group. So these are the muscles that come up over the top of the forearm. Now these won't be as thick as the flexors, the ones that sit on the underside. The reason they're not as thick is the ones on top, the extensors, the long ones here, those are responsible for releasing your fingers and opening your fingers out. That doesn't need to carry as much weight as closing your fingers and holding things, so doesn't need us to hold as much weight, so the muscles won't be as big. And now we'll move on to the next view. This is going to be the front view. So from here, we're going to have the deltoid come down over the top of the arm, and it's going to come down about a third of the way. And then we're going to place the bicep and the tricep. Now from this angle, they're going to overlap quite a lot. And then the bicep's going to come down to a point here. And you can see that, like we talked about with the plait or the chain, is the division there where the two muscles of the forearm are going to come out. Or in this case, there's the group on the left, which is going to be the brachio group and the extensor group, and then the muscles on the inside, which we're simplifying into one group, the flexor group. And so we'll just tighten those forms up. And then with the hand, you can see that that line from the bicep, that split between those groups of muscles in the forearm, is going to line up with the thumb. And now, from the back view, we'll do the deltoid, again, coming over and coming down about a third of the length. From the back, we're going to see the shapes of the tricep and then the forearm. Now the tricep is different from the bicep. You can see the elbow come through firstly, but then also you can see that the tricep has a muscle bladder, almost like the elbow bone comes up a bit higher. It's not actually the bone, but it's just a bit of a tendons that connect the muscle. And so that's going to come up a bit higher and have this sort of divot in to the muscle there. And then, as we go down along the forearm, we're going to make a line for the bone that comes from the elbow down to the palm just below the pinky. This is going to be the ulna. We'll talk about this a bit more in a second, but for now, remember that from the elbow to the palm at the base of the wrist is where the ulna will go. And that's going to be the bone along the bottom, and you can use that as a handy division line for those muscle groups. So on the outside, again, we have the brachio group and the extensor group, and on the inside, we have the flexor group. And then moving on to the inner view of the arm. So here, we'll have the deltoid coming over again, but this time, since it's coming over, and we're looking at it from the inside, we're not really going to see it slip between, because it's coming around behind what we're looking at. That's a view of the deltoid you can't really get, because that involves, it's like an action figure with the arm taken off. Now we can see the bicep and the tricep, and now in between those two, we have the brachialis. This is a little bit of muscle that you can see between them on the inside edge on particularly muscular figures. You don't see it very often, but I just want it there because it affects the structure of the muscles around it. And so we'll have the same thing with the elbow and that bit of sinew above it pushing the tricep to be a little higher. And then we'll do the base shape for the forearm, remembering that it widens for the first third and then narrows the remaining 2/3. And then we'll do the detailing in of the musculature. I'll just sharpen those up a bit. But from the inside edge, it's pretty much just that big muscle of the flexor group. Now, to make these a little bit easier to understand, let's go through and tidy them up and just color code them a bit. So to begin with then, in red, we're going to use that for the deltoid. Now you can, if you want, split the deltoid into 3. This is for characters with a lot of really strong muscle definition. It is still one muscle, but if it's really well defined, it can show up as having these 2 division lines, making it look like it's 3 chunks. Now, as we move down, the next thing we're going to color is we're going to do the biceps. So these will be in orange. So those are the ones at the front. So when you flex your muscles in a sort of strongman pose, they're the ones that sit on top. And then behind it, in yellow, we're going to do the triceps. So that's the ones that sit behind. They're the ones responsible for straightening your arm or striking your hand down. And then, in green, coming out from between the bicep and the tricep, we're going to do the brachio group. Now this is going to be a couple of muscles together, but you can see they come out from between the bicep and the tricep as though there's a flagpole along that line that stretches down to the elbow there. And then they wrap around and coil around and then come into that center line there. And then, in a teal color, we're going to do the extensor group. These are the ones for straightening your fingers out. And you can see how they're not as thick as the inner side of the upper arm. So these are going to be in blue. And you can see we don't really see them from the outside, just like we don't really see the brachio group and the extensor group from the inside. They're essentially on different sides of the arm. And you can see how that lines up with the palm direction too. And on top of the back of the hand, coming out from that is the extensors. But if we look at the palm, coming out from below the palm is the flexors. And then we'll highlight then the bone in purple. So that's going to be the ulna and the elbow. And we'll also have a little purple spot there for the brachialis. And what I'm going to do here is put in the muscle fibers. Now these are important more for notation than anything else. Like I said before, all muscles connect from one bone to another bone, and the body's shape is defined by those connecting masses. So if we know where the muscles connect to and from, so long as we have a skeleton, we can assign muscles from those bones to those other bones and shape the entire figure. Now, what happens when these arms bend? Let's draw some arms bending. So we'll have one arm flexing up, and another one as well. And we can see then what happens is that as the muscle flexes up, we compress those volumes. So you can see here in the one on the left, we've got the bicep is much, much shorter. It's taking up half the length. But since the volume is constant, it bulges up. And then, conversely, when we have the arm on the right, as that flex happens, the bicep does get compressed in, but the tricep gets lengthened and stretched. And we can also see that things like the brachialis group, or brachia group, that one is getting squished in. And just like the muscles on the inner side of the upper arm are also getting squished in. Since the bone can't come out, and those come out sideways, you'll get this big outward push from the sides. It'll come out laterally, and it'll really pronounce those bones of the elbow as they're pulled away from it. So with the character doing a double flex, we can really see how some of the muscles will be pulled taut, and some of the muscles are going to be compressed. So here with a double flex, we can see that as the arms come up, the bicep and the deltoid get compressed in and they pop up. But then reversing that, we've got the deltoid underneath that stretches out and gets longer and thinner. And same thing will happen to the chest. So as the arms raise up, the pectorals are going to be pulled up and away. And that makes them flatter because they have to get longer and maintain their volume. And then as part of that stretch, we can see that the muscles of the forearm will be squished out to the side. It'll get more of a sort of onion shape down towards the elbow, while it also makes the elbow bone a lot more pronounced as it comes out. Now the next thing I want to touch base on then is how to orient the muscles in the arm. So in the arm, you've got a few bones. The ones we're going to focus on here is going to be the upper arm, which is a single bone, but then in the forearm, we've got two bones here. We've got the radius and the ulna. Now these matter because using them, you orient the hand, and then between the hand and the elbow, you then use these two bones to decide what muscles go where. Now, the way I remember these two is you've got the ulna is under, and the radius is rad, because the radius connects to your thumb, and the ulna connects to your pinky. So if we look then at an arm with this kind of structure, we'll draw the upper arm, and then if we can sort of see through the forearm, with these two bones that come through. Now those two bones, you can think of them as establishing the plane upon which these two muscles are divided. If we draw then the hand out with the thumb at the top and the pinky at the bottom, that splits that arm into an inner and an outer edge. And you can see this lines up perfectly with the way we've split those groups up, where we have on the outer edge, we've got the brachia group and the extensor group, and then on the inside edge, we've got the flexor group. And this is all based around the position of those two bones. And so if we put a pose here with a person with their arms up like this, if we know where the hands are supposed to be, we can use that to determine where those inner and outer faces of those muscles will need to be. So we can then apply the inner and outer muscles, and we'll know where to split them into different ones and where to use a single one. And we can keep that line of the ulna. So the ulna is a bone, and you can feel it on your own arm now, where the bone comes close to the surface over the entire length of your forearm. And so that's a really good, easy division to use to see which muscles go where, and its position is based on your hand position. But what happens when we rotate the hand? So let's do some some front views of the arm here, one with the palm down and one with the palm out. And we can see then that using these hands to then draw the line of the ulna, we can divide then whether we'll see, if the hand is out, we'll see the wrist, and we'll see the inner side of the forearm, and then where the palm is down, we'll see the top part of the forearm, which is going to be your extensor group and brachial group. Now lastly, we've got how these connect to the rest of the body. Now if you remember from the neck and shoulders video, we've got the muscles of the pectorals that slip in then between the deltoid and bicep. And so it slips in between and flips over and it grabs the bone under the surface there. So on the back, the same thing will happen with the lats. It comes in and it slips in under the deltoid and grabs the bone of the upper arm. And that's how that will integrate. So let's go in then and talk through a few examples of some of these in practice. So here we've drawn a figure and we decided on the hand position. That hand position is really useful. It's going to give us where the ulna is going to be and where the radius is going to be. And that then helps me determine where I'm going to put the muscles in the forearm. So I'll then have the shoulders. I'll put the deltoids down that come into the bicep and tricep. And then from the bicep and tricep, I then build the muscles out of the forearm. And you see all of these match up to those color-coded ones we did before. And you can also see how much that ulna can come to the surface even on a really muscular figure. And now, on a figure doing a flex, we'll have those ulna coming up there on the outer edge from the elbow, and we've got those fibers of the muscles showing that lift and stretch of the tricep and compression of the bicep and deltoid. And now, on this figure in a more sort of left-facing fighting pose, we've got the hands here, and the hands then determine where that ulna is going to be. And so with the ulna defined, I know where the muscles are going to go for the forearm, and I interact that then with the muscles of the upper arm. And now here on this figure, we've got someone who's not very muscular. But we can still see what's going to join where. So with the arm over like that in a punch, we know where the punch is facing, which means we know where the pinky is. And if we know where the pinky is, we know where the ulna will be going from the palm at the bottom, where it joins the pinky side, to then the elbow. And then that helps us map the muscles of the shoulder and upper arm. And then we have the arms crossing in front, same thing. We'll have that same set of muscles, even though they're not very defined, they're going to be responsible for the thickness. So even though the muscles on the top of the forearm are smaller, since we have the brachial group on top of the extensor group, that's what's going to cause that bulge. And then, as the arm bends on the left, you can see that bone, that elbow and the ulna, extending out and pulling the flesh away. And then, with the arm up, we can see that there's a lot of detail here. We don't have to include all these edges in the actual sketch, but we can see how those muscles affect the shape. And then, with this character here from the side, one of the things I want to highlight with that is how you'll get the shape of the brachialis group, and why it won't always sort of show as having that corner, that flag corner. Because towards that corner, the muscle has a bit of a tendon to muscle bladder. So here I've noted a bit of a sort of a stroked edge there. So when you show this with shape, you're likely not to show that shape coming all the way to the corner, but rather just that bulge, almost like it's a snake that's coming around and sort of wrapping over. It does connect to the corner there, but it connects to the corner there with tendon. So it won't have mass there. And now, with a very slight figure with their arms out, we'll have them reaching out with those simple shapes, and then we'll use those simple shapes as molds to pour those muscles into. It can often be very helpful to not start with the musculature, but rather start with those simple forms, and then apply the musculature inside them. And now, with the same figure from multiple views, we'll have them clasping their cheeks, and here, that same bend of the elbow causes the flesh to pull away, and that causes the bone to become prominent but also that bulge to the sides of the lower part of the forearm, both on the inside and on the outside. And here, with an arm stretched up and away and turned around, the hand orientation at the end sets where the elbow will have to be. So we can use the hand position to help map those muscles. And here we can see with that rotation, we're seeing so much more of the tricep than any other part of the arm. And then lastly, the character here with the basketball, we've got the same thing with these muscles being bent, and then the brachialis group coming up in more of sort of a flag shape, coming from that division between the bicep and tricep down and wrapping around the arm. So it's with these then, if we apply that, we can go through and do our little paint here. Now, if you do want to draw along with this many-armed girl here, I've got a 1:1 speed draw along that should be coming out the next day or so, if it's not already, depending when you're watching the video. And so you'll see how we just do the same thing for the arm construction with those simple shapes and volumes, and then we apply to them those same musculature rules. Now, here is where we're going to visualize it. So we might have these muscles in our mind. We don't have to draw them on the paper every time. Eventually, what my hope is that you'll have internalized these simplified muscle groups and be able to just bang out these shapes whenever you draw something. And that way you can get a bunch of them done in no time. So, now that's it. I hope that's given you a good scaffolded way to approach arms and arm anatomy. I would really love to hear how you went and what you thought. Any questions you have, do pop them in the comments as well as any ideas you have for future videos or things you're having trouble with you'd like to see covered. Post your homework. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this, like, sub, all that great thing, you can join the Patreon if you're in a position to do so, where I have the PSD files of the stuff we go through here, as well as the other speed paints, and they get the exclusive speed paint every other week or so. In the meantime, though, thank you very much for your time. You have a good one, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers. Bye.